Hello and welcome to the UT Daily Beacon's Roundtable discussion on diversity. We are joined by...
I'm Jevonte Porter. I'm Leadership and Service Ambassador here within the Center for Leadership and Service.
I'm Caoile, and I'm a member of the Filipino-American Association.
I'm Faatin Salekin, and I'm part of the MSA UT, and I'm also the Secretary.
And I'm Joan Heminway. I'm a professor at the College of Law and one of the two faculty advisors of Sexual Empowerment and Awareness at Tennessee.
And I am Misty Anderson. I'm a professor in the English department, and I'm a member of Tennessee Diversity Now, a faculty group supporting diversity efforts.
And I'm Christopher Salvemini, assistant news editor at the Daily Beacon. So, let's just jump right into this. You were very involved in, even before the whole controversy with legislators on Sex Week and can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my involvement with legislative activity and diversity on campus ranges back almost 5 years now, actually, as I was thinking about it in preparation for our roundtable today. Back in the 2012-2013 school year, I was asked to be one of the two initiating faculty advisors for sexual empowerment and awareness at Tennessee, which is the group that sponsors, along with many other groups on campus, the Sex Week program, as well as the Red Zone program in the fall and other related programming over the course of the year. In that first year, we were really getting started and had a great program put together for educating students in a sex-positive way about things that we felt that they needed to know to protect themselves and also to just understand better how sex fits into life. And things were quite on a roll until the week before the program or so, when there was a lot of press, and I know we're going to talk about the press and communication and how that relates to some of these issues that blew up into, I'll call it a subversive sort of legislative conversation with the campus that resulted in the campus withdrawing funding from the first Sex Week program with a little over a week to spare before the program started. That funding was filled in eventually, and the program did occur. And that was a big relief, I think, for the students who had budgeted certain items and had people coming in from out of town. But it didn't stop there because some of the programming money that they got was from student activities fees. And so the next year, the legislature much more forcefully went after student activities fees and actually changed as a result of the legislative session that was in 2014, the way that student activities are funded on campus through the activities fee. In the following year, 2015, really we were working through that program and the legislative activity was somewhat limited. But last year, or really earlier this year, the 2016 legislative session, the Tennessee General Assembly, along with many other issues I know we're going to discuss, came back after Sex Week in a much more powerful way, prohibiting state funds to be used to promote or support the Sex Week program. And that became part of a larger controversy that I know we're going to talk about. So what I see from my perspective is an incursion sort of slowly and surely toward the legislature's more active involvement in the content of student programming on campus.
I know you're pretty involved in Diversity Now, Tennessee Diversity Now.
Right.
I was hoping you'd be able to comment on the gender-neutral pronoun controversy that was, pretty much sparked this whole thing.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about that, and I'd be interested in Joan's thoughts and others too. So the gender-neutral pronoun controversy started, and I'll tell my story about this. I received a text from a friend who lives in New York saying, "What's going on at UT with pronouns?" And I'm a pretty involved faculty member. I teach classes that include things about gender and its history. And I had to write back to the friend and say, "I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about." So he had seen it on Fox News, that somehow UT had allegedly required everyone to use gender-neutral pronouns. So the way this story was first reported was so erroneous, and the fact that I heard about it from a friend in New York texting me saying what's going on lets me know that that was a story that started with a report that wasn't accurate, and that pulled out something that was on a website that the Pride Center had put up, and it was under the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. But from the beginning, it was full of sort of false representation, quite honestly. No one had been required to use any pronouns or required to do anything differently. It was just a suggestion. But that story was reported and then re-reported and re-reported so that it became somehow a national story when the content of that story just wasn't true. Yes, there was a website. Yes, it got pulled down. And ironically, the whole world knows about our website now because it went all over the place through media outlets. So that website and the recommendations were simply to acknowledge that you don't always know if you have a transgender student in your class, and that asking people the name they prefer to use and the pronouns they prefer to use up front is a way to not single someone out. It's the kind of thing we honestly do on the first day in class. And I have ever since I've been teaching, long before we were talking about gender neutral pronouns, because I want my students to feel addressed with respect. I want to make sure I'm using the right name. People don't always go by the first name as it's printed. So some of this is actually very simple, but that story took fire. And we've been trying to put that fire out, I think, since.
Speaking about the students, what were your guys' take on the Office of Diversity, gender neutral pronoun controversy, all this?
That, to me, it was more of a personal thing. Like, why do I have to change what I'm so used to, what I'm comfortable with saying? It's like you telling me to adopt a whole new way of thinking, way of speaking, and to make you feel better. And to me, at the time, I was very uneducated about the situation, so we didn't really know too much about what was taking place. So it was just me being I took the situation personal, me being uneducated, me being overly offensive and not realizing the importance of why it is there. And over time, allowing myself to just digest what was taking place, I understood, like, I would want somebody to respect me and address me in a mannerable way. So I feel like I should do the same thing in the hopes that they know that I'm too respecting them too. So learning that and just digesting that and just taking it all in, it helped me realize the importance of it. But at first it was a little iffy, but just going over this, okay, why? I was asking that why question. Why should I do this or why should I do this? And it's important to ask the why question, because if you don't ask the why question, you continue to go, without knowing it, and no one wants to go without knowing. So I asked that why question, and it pretty much helped me a little bit understand the importance of how you should address someone and the respect you get from it. And I think it opens up to a more comfortable conversation, as well as them being able to accept you for who you are, vice versa. So in the beginning it was iffy, but later on as I digested, it pretty much helped me. So now I know how to address anyone, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, out of respect. So
I think in my case, I have many friends who are LGBTQ, and for them it's like seeing it happen to them and being around them, experiencing these kinds of things. It kind of makes me think about why is it so hard for people to just address them the way they want to be. It's kind of like if you go by a certain name, like a first name, but you actually go by your second name, it's like, are you gonna just call them by their first name just because it's more comfortable for you, even though that's not what they go by? So to me, I think it's just as simple as just respecting kind of their identity in a sense. I don't know why it's so difficult to just address the people the way they want to be addressed, but I can see why it would be different for other people, just because, like you said, it's more comfortable to just do what you've known for a long time, and it's hard to kind of break that mold. And I think for many people who aren't as aware, that's definitely a case. But I think because of the diversity, that's why it's so important, like, to learn about that stuff. As students, we are always kind of immersed in situations where there's people that we might not have kind of encountered in our life before. But I think that exposure and that awareness really makes it that makes it so that we learn from each other.
Yeah, yeah. So like at the time, I personally was completely unaware of it, and now that I'm hearing more about it, it does ring a bell about like now that times are changing, and it's never gonna stay the same, and so I think this is a like he was saying, like it's kind of hard to like change yourself into new thinking and stuff like that. But because of that, we're being more tolerant, and we're learning more things. You know, we're exposing ourselves to the world. And I think the hardest thing about us is that we don't like to be in uncomfortable positions, and like there are probably times where like it's completely new with the gender neutral pronouns and stuff like that. So it's for everybody may not be uncomfortable, but we have to learn to go outside our comfort zone, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and embrace that change. You know, it's from an Islamic point of view, you know, it's like all about you respect everybody. You know, everyone gets that same respect back. And you embrace that change. You know, you always stick to your core beliefs, but at the same time, you know the world is changing. There's all different types of people in this world. You're gonna have to get to know all different types, and that's why you just gotta push yourself and know that everyone's made for a reason, and just accept it in that way. So yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. And you're very involved in a lot of different organizations that deal with diversity. I was hoping you could speak about how the Office of Diversity was sort of involved in your organizations before it was defunded.
Like the MSA is a Muslim Students Association, so it is a religious organization, but people fail to account that the religion of Islam also, it entails a lot of different cultures. So like you'll have someone from Egypt, some from Lebanon, from Syria, from Bangladesh, you know, all different cultures. And I think that's the one thing people tend to forget, that it's a very diverse cultural group. Because the thing is, right now, what you see on the media, you know, you see a lot of negativity right now and whatnot, and that really gives a misconception on the religion itself, on the pure content of the religion. And so because of that, people see, and when they hear Muslim Students Association, they automatically think, oh, Islam, you know, some people that are ignorant may tie back to ISIS and all this stuff, you know, which is completely not the case. But you have to look at it from the other perspective, that it's bringing cultures together. You know, you're trying different things, you're learning different things. You know, like some of my best friends, they're completely different from me, you know, as far as culture and stuff like that. But we're together because of our faith, and like we get to know each other really well. So
I think for my association, we are a relatively new association group. We just started it pretty much last school year, so we're relatively young, and it all just started out as me and my sister thinking, hey, like, where is the Filipino community at UT? Does it exist? How do we branch out? How do we meet more people like who share the same culture, and how do we spread that awareness? And it all just started like simply at dinner. We were just talking about that, and then the next semester her and her friend really just started pushing it out. And I think the biggest relevance of the defunding of the Office of Diversity is that as a starting group, it was kind of hard for us to branch out in terms of how do we get ourselves out there in terms of maybe money, like funding, for things that we want to do. So one of the activities we do is like karaoke night. So something simple as that. We had to fundraise for our own club, selling Filipino food. So I feel like it's important that the Office of Diversity become addressed, because I feel like many groups would want to start up. And how do they start without the help of someone? And funding, I feel like, is important, especially for us, because we wanna spread awareness. We want people to be a part of our community, and it's hard to do that with just student power. So I think that for many other groups, I feel like we're all in the same page, but so we're constantly trying to think about things of how do we get ourselves out there. And I think that's why that's important for us, is because we need that help.
For me, honestly, I don't believe that my organization is under the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I think we're under the Office of Center for Leadership and Service. However, I do have friends and peers and classmates who is highly affected by that. And one of the most important things, aside from money being taken away, aside from everything as a whole, relationships. Like the relationships between the staff and faculty and the students was affected, and it was injured, actually. I believe that some faculty members took on the act of looking for new jobs, I believe. Some people are no longer here with us due to that. And one of the most important things about relationship is the value in it. Like for us as students, for those who travel far to come to a school such as UT, you're 6 hours away, or you're states away, or even countries away. You do lean on your relationships that you have with people here at UT for support, moral support, as well as just mentally and physically. So you need those relationships. And for that being said, the way that it was affected is that so many of my peers and my friends lost that friend. They lost that support. They lost that that help that they usually get from them. And so it made them no longer have a purpose of why should I stay at UT, or how is it going to affect me if I continue to go to a school who no longer cares about me, because the person who did is no longer here. So where does my get up and go come from now? Like, where does my drive come from now? Like, so how do I stay persistent with school and academics or organizations? How do I keep myself involved when the person who kept me on track and kept me accountable is no longer here? And so it's now students are looking and say, well, what do I choose now? Like, how do I go forward? How do I move on with my life? And that I make the right decisions, because as simple as it is, like, oh, you need someone like to go forward, as simple as we make it seem, it's really, really important. It's really important, and and I feel like it needs to be important for everybody. And if it's not important for everybody, then we have a lot of growing to do.
Jevonte, you just brought up so many good points. It's hard to explain some of the connections that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion made possible, but we saw that evidence when the office was under attack and students turned out to support that office.
Absolutely.
It's very unusual to see students turning out to support an administrative office. That's an indication of how much that office was supporting them. So I think that's where you can see that it did make a big difference in the lives of students on campus. And we have to go forward from where we are now. But I really appreciate you sort of framing that out in terms of support that sometimes is a little hard to calculate or track or explain. But we know that office was making a difference in the lives of students.
I feel like the old fart on this panel too.
Yeah, I know.
You know, no offense meant to any that consider themselves that, otherwise, but
I'm with you.
I see, there you go. I see some, I meant you when I was saying that, right? I was listening to all three of you and reflecting on the history of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and more specifically the role of the Vice Chancellor in that, because we didn't have one until a few years ago. And so I remember when I was the Faculty Senate President, which was about 6 years ago now, having discussions with the campus administration, with whom I met every month, about whether we should have a vice chancellor for diversity and inclusion. That name actually hadn't yet been arrived at, and trying to piece together what it is that this person would do and what this office might provide. And I think Misty's right, none of us knew until last year when push came to shove really what the office and the vice chancellor meant for students. And I do think all three of you to some extent have spoken to that. It's not like you can really even articulate to some extent what it does for you, but I think the fact that it's an umbrella of some kind to make campus organizations feel that they can grow up, that they can form and thrive on campus, maybe to see some of those interactions that brought those many students out, lying on their backs, writing banners, protesting with signs, doing so many things that in my 16 plus years on this campus, I have not seen happen.
We'd never seen anything like it before.
I mean, even when we've had yucky football coaches, the protests haven't been that strong or that widespread. I saw students from groups that I don't usually see together at some of those gatherings. And it gave me real heart that that people were paying attention, that our students were being educated outside the classroom, were taking advantage of the campus in ways that they hadn't before. And I understood myself much more palpably through your eyes and the eyes of your colleagues what the Office for Diversity and Inclusion has meant to this campus in just a few short years. So thanks for sharing today, because all that
Yeah.
pride,
Yeah.
that Vol pride got brought back, in me.
We haven't even gone through the controversies yet. There's also the Christmas post, which drew
boy.
a
Yes.
lot of attention to Ricky
Yes.
Hall, to Jimmy Cheek. Let's talk about that, and how did the media portray it?
In the way that the memo about holiday parties was found is kind of in a backwater section of the HR website. And it's there because it's about office parties, not about student functions or anything like that. It's supposed to pertain to, say, the example where the engineering department is having a party, and maybe half the engineering department isn't Christian, or it just sort of a little reminder that there are a lot of different holidays that happen, and so when it's the official office party, be aware of that. That's actually, from a labor point of view and a sort of employer point of view, not very strange. It's a pretty standard practice. But suddenly, overnight, we had canceled Christmas. And yet, as cameras are coming around campus to catch this story, you see how many Christmas trees are up, along the walk and in all of these
On
offices.
the buildings, we have the little ones on tops of the buildings.
Like, we're doing a Christmas carol at the CBT, all of these things are happening, and so something didn't match there. And so it was a strange time, and it seemed like a lot of anxiety was being directed onto the issues around Christmas, and it effectively created an issue where I don't think we really had one on campus.
I don't think it was just the media, because I received a call. I think I was at work in the registrar's office. My grandmother called. So are they canceling Christmas? Like, are you? So what are you like? What's your religion now? Don't you come home with that? Like, I was like, what? So what is going on? And she stated, like, why do they know before we do? And so I think it was more so of the public perceiving, like, one of the things that the media does well is they change perceptions, and the public receive their perception in a more detrimental way. And I think that the media had already added fuel to the fire. What the public did is that they spread the fire, and because it was one of those not knowing what was going on, I strongly believe that the public was educated on what was really being presented in itself. They just took what the media had already thrown out there and they ran with it. So had they known, had they investigated internally, like say, hey, how do you guys feel about this, or what's really going on with the situation, instead of like taking external views and moving forward with that, then I think the public's view on it would have been totally different. So I had to pretty much talk to my grandmother to let her know, well, hey, I don't think that's what's going on. I still believe in the Lord, and I still want a Christmas gift. Like, don't forget to give me my Christmas gift when I get home. But
your grandmother, excuse me for interrupting, but I love this story of your grandmother and her reaction and calling you at work, on campus to do this, because I think she is prototypical of some of the public reaction. I'd be interested to see if y'all had friends or family that called you too. And so I was trying to think, Misty, about what I would say about what the threat is. I think a lot of these things, Sex Week, the Christmas memo, so to speak, the holiday parties memo, the gender-neutral pronouns issue, represent a threat to people because of their beliefs, right? And so people think that diversity and inclusion efforts are an effort to stomp out, whether it's a majoritarian view or just a personal view, whether it's religious, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, that these efforts represent a repression as opposed to an expansion to include more views. And I'm not sure how we got there, but the whole perversion of the term political correctness has something to do with this, and the recharacterization of things as politically correct as being pejorative, as opposed to being a term, that is positive on inclusion. That people felt that their Christianity was being threatened, just as your grandmother did, that people felt that their bisexual nature or their very strong sex and gender linkage was being threatened. And I think it's because of a failure to understand the underlying message and really what is happening.
For me, going back to that idea of political correctness, I definitely agree that people kind of have this aversion towards the idea of being politically correct. They think that it's something that, may limit the way they're comfortable with like their comfort in certain like social situations. But in my opinion, I feel like it's not so much more than like being politically correct, really. It's just being aware that other things exist. And I think that's the biggest thing that many people kind of misconstrue. So like with the Christmas party thing, they automatically thought that Christmas was shut down. But really it's just saying that be aware that there are other types of holidays or other types of celebrations. They didn't really say that you can't have Christmas. They didn't say that you can't like have a Christmas tree or have a Santa Claus like statue or whatever. They just simply said be aware, be mindful of other things that could go on. And I think that's a part of that comfort issue that many people, I guess predominantly in the South, is very concentrated on a certain like certain type of society. And I think that that's a part of it with all the different people coming together. It's kind of hard for them to suddenly adapt to the changes like you're saying that are happening, especially with young people, and how we're more easily like we accept things easier than I feel like older people do. So with like news like this, like the gender pronouns, we might not be aware of it at first, but we're like, okay, but I think with like older people, it's harder to break their preconceived notions of just things.
As college students, like now with the millennial generation, we with all these, like I'm a firstborn generation. You know, my dad came from Bangladesh and he came here, and so I'm the firstborn, and so we're a lot of us as college students are more exposed to firstborn generations from other countries, as opposed to people that like like your grandmother, for example, like she was probably exposed to completely different types of people, you know, and so that mindset becomes concrete as we get older, and when that concrete mindset gets in, it's hard to, like I said, change. You could like embrace that change or embrace something different. You know, when we see something like that, we see like how, okay, like automatically think, okay, I'm just trying to open my mind a little bit. And they see it, it's the other way around, you know. So it's just, again, it goes back to exposure. And with time, it's all changing, you know. Everyone's intertwining and all that stuff. So
it all culminated in Public Chapter 1066.
Yes.
I was wondering, starting off, what is the legislator's role in university affairs?
Of course, the legislature funds less and less, but still in significant part, the University of Tennessee, and through that our campus's activities. We all know about, any of us who've studied any political science know about the power of the purse, and so withholding funds and giving funds is something that is clearly within the legislature's power. Now that power is subject to state and federal constitutional guidelines, and I think we all need to understand that, as well as procedural guidelines that the legislature sets up for itself to operate. And among those guidelines are the First Amendment of the Constitution, you know, which involves freedom of association, free speech, and things that some of the actions of our legislature have either come perilously close to, or maybe even actually transgressed, depending on how they're interpreted in the hands of the people that use the legislation. And 1066 does, in fact, exercise that legislative power to remove funding, specifically, as you alluded to before, from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at UT for this budgetary cycle, for the current academic year that we now are all in, the 2016-2017 academic year. It also has a separate section of the bill that relates to the three types of things you've asked for already: the gender-neutral pronouns issue, the cancellation of Christmas issue, and the sex week issue. All of those are raised in a separate section of the bill with various restrictions depending on each of those activities on the use of state funds for promoting, supporting. The words are different in each case. Those activities related to those three things on campus. So that is at least the start of the legislative power. How far that can go within those constitutional limits, I think, is a matter for public debate, should be a matter for public debate.
I will say we've never really seen a piece of legislation this intrusive, you know, in terms of managing a section, of our spending. The change in student activities fee was the other really big one. This is bigger. With student activities fees, now the reason that you have to show your ID and swipe and prove that you opted in to attend anything has actually been a burden on the university. It's created the need for staffing things we didn't used to have to worry about. 1066 is taking this to a whole nother level and shutting down an entire office of the university for a year. Now, I want to try to put a look to the positive here about what could happen next year. I think if we can get the message out to the constituents of the legislators who somehow thought this was a good idea or thought that somehow they were representing their constituents' interests, that it was a good idea to shut down an office that had really been seeing some gains in recruiting the UT population and the retention of students once they got here. You were saying if you're far from home, say you came from the other end of the state or you came from out of state, your support network is a big indicator of your student success. 1066 is taking a bite out of that in certain ways. So I think there were several different pieces of legislation that were floated, and this is the one that passed. There was a version in which the Office of Diversity and Inclusion was going to, all of that money was going to have to go to stickers that said, "In God We Trust," which they were going to make UT print. So there was something vindictive about the entire debate, and it felt like it just had moved so far away from the interest of Tennesseans, the interest of our students, and I hope that as we sort of get through this year and we've figured out some pasted together solutions for some student groups have been left a little more out in the cold, that maybe we can get back to the business of taking care of all the vols and making sure that students really do succeed here.
I'm a big stickler for people who are involved, meaning that if you are a part of the UT culture, I strongly support your opinion or your decision or your vote or whatever floats your boat as far as how things should be ran here at this school, at this university. But to me, as a political science major, I believe that people who are not familiar with how things go about in our everyday lives here at this school, in this university, in the atmosphere that we experience every day, should not have the power to make decisions for us. Because if you're not experiencing what we are experiencing, if you're not living where we're living, and if you're not actually going through what we go through here at this university, then how can you tell me what suits my ability to function in an environment that I obviously agree with? You know what I mean? So it's like I understand legislation as far as the importance of why we have them. Yes, we do need you as far as guidance, as far as administration regions with finances or whatever pertains to that. But as far as our culture and what we go through as students, ask us first, because I believe that their decision that was made was not made according to how we felt as students. It was made according to, well, this is what's going on, let's fix it. We invite you in, but for you to come in here strong and assuming there's a problem and not really talking to us, it's like a slap in the face, as in our views don't matter. And so I think overall it made me as a student, I'm not speaking for you guys too, but I'm pretty sure that it suits you as well, as a student, feel like that my opinions and my voices as a college educated student who pays tuition, voice don't matter.
Yeah, and I think for many of us, like who are in college, we understand that this is a privilege.
Right.
Not everyone can come to where we are right now, and
Absolutely.
so we want to take advantage of our education as much as we could. And a part of that is being in a community that celebrates things that educate us outside of the classroom. So like Sex Week, and Sex Week, I think for many of me and my friends, Sex Week is great. We think that's such a great thing to have, and especially for young people like us, like, you know, like we need to be educated about stuff like that, regardless if our parents don't want us being sexually active, regardless if the state wants to be sexually active or whatever. That's our prerogative as college students, that's something that's a reality for us. You know, we meet people. That's something that happens in our lives. And I think things like that really kind of remind us, like, hey, like, we're here for a reason and we are paying tuition.
Right.
So we want to be able to make the most out of what we have. And not having those things kind of limits us into not just expressing ourselves, but also thinking more outside the box, becoming more aware of the world, becoming more aware of what it's like to become an adult. So I think that's a lot of things for us as students, is just being able to have things at our disposal that's not necessarily classroom education tools, but more like life skills, like education.
And if you have those type of activities on campus that educate students, it changes their mindset to a more deserved intuition of understanding how to be an adult. And so not only does it puts them in a mind frame of respecting themselves and respecting what their families wanted from them, but it gives them a sense of expectations and something to live up to. And so if you're stripping that from us, you're stripping more than just the diversity offers. You're stripping life tools that is needed to cope in the world that we live in today.
So the full impact of the bill is that the university cannot function as well as it did before the bill.
And I think, like, yes, the legislation, they have wisdom. I mean, they've gone through college, of course, but you have to also
Actually, not all legislators have gone through.
Exactly.
They
See, that's
haven't.
another thing. So on top of that,
you don't even need a degree to be
exactly.
politics.
And so, like, the thing is, and the times have changed. You have to completely understand that and come to an understanding that, like, even though these college students right now are going through this, I need to put myself in that situation. You know, it sounds kind of funny, but, like, I need to take a day out of my office, go and see what's really going on campus.
Right.
You know, what are these college students looking at that are making them so proactive,
Right.
so wanting to do more things and stuff like that, and not, like, you know, because obviously we have good intentions. I mean, it's not like we were trying to make this world a worse place, you know. It's just we need people to see. We need you legislators to see what's really going on. And you staying in your office and stuff like that, it's not gonna help anything.
It's like they have this corporate view of things.
Exactly.
Like you said, like the decision office, like corporate, in the corporate world, it's all about making decisive decisions in a timely fashion.
Exactly.
But one thing about a college atmosphere is not corporate. It's being amongst your people.
It's shaping your
It's one of
mind.
those like not offending any people working at McDonald's, but it's one of those customer service oriented like atmosphere. Like you live amongst the people. You see the views amongst college students. You don't look at it as with a corporate view.
So basically the last question, especially because you're students, is college still a place where you can have, you know, talk about really abstract, really different ideas? Is it still a civil place, especially with the Pride Center vandalism recently?
As college students in general, I think we can still discuss these, but if we go above that realm and start talking to our, like, faculty and stuff, and then they hear these things, oh, they're talking about this, we shouldn't let them talk about it, let's go talk to the legislation. You know, that could have been the case of the whole legislation thing, you know, you don't know. But I think because we are molding our minds right now, you know, as college students, we've left this, like, safe haven of, like, our parents' home in elementary school, middle school, high school. Now we're delving into a pseudo adult world right now, you know, and trying to get what's going on of things and trying to expand that mind. So I think it's really imperative that we still keep discussing all these issues and trying to find good, reasonable outcomes for it, you know, and at the same time also have people above us, like the legislations, that also help us to build ourselves instead of trying to create blocks and stuff, trying to keep us in a different way. Try to see how we can better ourselves this way. And I don't like I said, cutting diversity funds may not be the best idea, but there's other ways about doing things, you know. And again, that's also one-on-one contact. You know, let us all speak to each other. You know, when you have an issue, you just can't let the issue slide by and not talk to the people that are part of the issue. You know, you have to talk it out. So I think it's still a bit like civil that we can still talk about it. We just gotta be careful how in depth or how much we expanded. You know, so that's I think. So
I think that that's the fear right there.
yeah,
Be careful.
exactly.
Like now I have to be careful.
Exactly. Yes. Not
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have limitations. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have boundaries. But what I am saying is that being in this realm, I shouldn't have to be careful. I should be educated on what I say, and it should be accepted. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, for instance, it's questionable to say, can we still have civil discussions in college? Because one of the reasons why we do come to college is to educate ourselves. And in order to be educated, you have to be aware. In order to be aware, you have to be taught these different things. Now, the perception you take upon hearing those things is up to you. However, you've received the information, but now I have to be careful in order to receive the information. Because how are you telling me that I can't receive this? And so it's like when having these discussions about different debatable topics that seems to bring about heatable, infuriated attitudes and emotions. How can we have a discussion that doesn't drive emotion-based but drive educational purposes, educational based? Like, how can we have that discussion with legislation taking so many of our? It's like they didn't take our rights to say what we want to say, but it's like it took a sense of us that left us feeling a little bit hopeless to the point to where we say, well, maybe I shouldn't talk about that because if I do, it'll be perceived in the wrong way. In all sense that you come to college to be educated. One of the reasons why I chose to go to UT and not at HBCU is because I wanted to be amongst diversity. I don't want to be taught how to live in a diverse world.
That's great.
I want it to come natural. And so now it's like it's making me second guess my decision of coming because now you're trying to teach me how to live amongst diverse people instead of allowing it to come natural. You need it to come natural because guess what? One day I too hope to go work in corporate America. But I don't want the corporate scopic microscope looking at me saying, this is the one side of you, this is how you think, and this is the way it should be done, because that's not the case. I've lived amongst people, I've intervened, I've been there. So now that I've done those things, I know what is expected. But for you to tell me this is the one side of everything, guess what? I too need to change your perspective, because it's not how things go. And so the question of civility, no, I don't think that the college atmosphere here at UT is a civility one. I don't think that we can have civil discussion because I feel like we are put in a box to where you listen to conversations, but only emotions drive the conversations, not people who are thinking critically about the situation and trying to figure out how can we move forward in a positive way.
I think the language between like civility and political correctness and whatnot, I think that's what's kind of being, I don't know, in a sense, misconstrued, like I was saying earlier. So in that topic of the Pride Center, I feel like this idea of a safe space, right? So many LGBT community feel like they need this safe space, which I agree. But I feel like if our campus was already open or didn't even have the need to have a safe space, we wouldn't have that conversation. If we were all kind of, I guess, talking in the same language about what civility means, then the ideas of safe spaces would not be such a big one. And I believe that many of the people that I know who are affected by this, this is what they face. Like, this is their everyday lives. Most of the time, they're scared for their life. I mean, that's a reality for a lot of people, not just for LGBT community, but just a lot of minority in general. It's their safety. And that's, I think, a thing in campus is, how does one feel safe? Is it by not talking about certain things? Is it by excluding certain like legislations or whatever? But I feel like in general, it's where like the point is being forgotten. Like the point of just being universal. It's not about one minority or it's not about a majority. It's about both of them. And as a college campus, I think we can't have that discussion until we recognize that it's not about parts, it's about a whole. And I think that's what makes our college experience a good one if we could all come as a whole and not like as parts. And I think that's what the role of, I don't know, diversity groups bring, is because, we're not coming as our own, we're coming as ourselves, but we want to be a part of the greater thing. And that's I think what most of the problem is that we're forgetting that we're a part of a big thing, not parts of a little thing.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so if anyone wants to contribute any final thoughts before we close off?
One thing I love how she said that it's not about parts, it's about whole. And then using it, I feel like that we have to understand that it takes your arm and your brain and your feet and your heart, all to function to make you whole as a human being.
Yeah.
So we realize that it takes those parts to make that whole, and stop trying to use the parts as a whole.
Yeah.
You need
That's
all
it,
parts to
that's-
come together.
yeah.
And so I love how that flows.
That's such an excellent point, because being together and coming together as one does not mean being the same. And if we're not the same, then how do we all come together as a community, feeling supported, feeling authorized? And these are the things that are at stake right now. We haven't really talked about the Pride Center very much, but they've been, the target of some real attacks. And ideally, we would be in a community where we don't have to articulate a
Right,
safe
exactly.
space. But until we get there, we just need to make sure there's support for people who are maybe facing greater levels of social threat. Sometimes that's materialized as physical threat, and sometimes it's a little harder to put a finger on. These are tough times in our country. This is flaring up well outside the boundaries of UT. So I feel like we've got a chance to show our better selves.
Right.
And I think the concept of looking at the whole, just building off, Misty, what you've said, as well as what all of you have said, does relate to looking to the whole as more than just UT, even though today we're really focused on the University of Tennessee and how it's been impacted by recent events. And that enables me to call out something that I think is important. The four of you have articulated, I think, really clearly the positive value of a college education and the community of ideas that we try to create here. And in particular, Faatin, you mentioned several times training your mind and things of that likeness. That positive that you all have articulated, I think we all ought to acknowledging the whole, that is a real point of contention as to whether training your mind in this environment, I think part of what the legislator is reacting to is they're concerned about that open training of your mind. It's not a positive for every legislator who's considering this issue. So I think the more that students can reach out, not just on individual legislation, I loved your idea of having people come to campus, but having people come to campus understanding that they're part of this whole, and that they have to try and understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of each of you and your colleagues as students, as well as faculty members, as well as administrators, instead of seeing them as the other. I think what inclusion is about, bottom line, is recognizing that that there's value in difference, and that we love difference, but that does mean that people are going to pick up things and read them differently, that people are going to perceive the value of a college education. We all hear, it's the liberal press, it's the liberal, progressive college. I think for that, those words as fighting words have different meanings for different people, but to me, this is about an environment where, regardless of where you come from and what your perspective is, you can share, and even where you disagree, try and understand where the other person is coming from. And I think if we took time maybe to understand a little bit more about where the legislators are coming from, and they took time to understand where we are, we might come to different accommodations in the legislature, and they might understand this is not about, educating people to specific values, but Jevonte, I think you said it well earlier, educating people to the whole panoply of values that they might have, so that we can either maintain our views and be more educated about those views, or in fact maybe change them as time goes on in response to other things in our environment.
But to be able to deal with people from different walks of life, people who are not just from like
skill.
everyone or you grew up with, it's such an important life skill, and that is going to have that's going to make a very big difference in the marketplace when you go out to interview for a job. Those are values that companies are looking for. I think we've got a great opportunity here, and I'm so glad you decided to come to UT instead of a historically black college, because when we share our lives together, I think
It's so much
we're
magical.
we're learning things we never would. And all of us, everybody benefits.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Yes, thanks to everybody. Great
And
conversation.
Thank you. This has been the University of Tennessee Daily Beacon Roundtable.